Did you know that before a revolution, the quietest sound is the turning of a page, and the loudest is the rumbling of an empty stomach? You are in a place where both are about to become deafening. Imagine a world where your wig is more important than your wallet, and a good rumor travels faster than a royal decree. It's a bit like modern social media, just with more silk and fewer cat videos. Before you get too comfortable, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel to encourage me to make more content like this. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, and let's begin tonight's journey. You are standing in a corridor of blinding light. Sunlight streams through towering arched windows, catching on crystal chandeliers and exploding into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It bounces off gilded mirrors that line the opposite wall, creating an illusion of infinite space, an endless golden hall populated by elegant, shimmering ghosts. This is the Palace of Versailles, the beating heart of the French monarchy. You can feel the smooth, cool marble under your thin-soled shoes. The air is thick with the scent of expensive perfume and beeswax, a sweet, cloying cloud designed to mask the less pleasant realities of 18th century hygiene. You watch a duchess pass by, her powdered hair a towering masterpiece of engineering, adorned with silk ribbons and a miniature, fully rigged sailing ship. Because why not? Everyone around you is a walking work of art. There lives a performance measured in bows, whispers, and carefully chosen insults. This is the world of the first and second estates, the clergy and the nobility. They are the shareholders of France, living lives of unimaginable privilege. They own most of the land, hold all the important jobs, and are conveniently exempt from most taxes. You witness the morning ritual of the king, the lever, where dozens of high-ranking nobles compete for the honor of watching him put on his royal breeches. It is a system built on proximity to power, a delicate dance of favor and influence, where a single glance from the monarch can make or break a family's fortune. It's an odd sort of reality, a gilded cage where the inhabitants have convinced themselves the bars are made of gold for their protection, not their confinement. Now, let's step outside. The golden light fades, the perfume is replaced by the smell of damp earth, coal smoke, and unwashed bodies. You are in a Parisian slum, a maze of narrow, winding streets where buildings lean against each other for support. The air is chilly, and you feel a gnawing emptiness in your stomach. You see a baker's shop, but a small, angry crowd is gathered outside. The price of bread has risen again, impossibly high. For the people here, the third estate, a loaf of bread, isn't a simple food item, it's life. It consumes over half of their daily income, and when it becomes scarce, a quiet desperation turns into a loud, simmering anger. A child cries, not from a fall, but from hunger. You watch a mother divide a small, coarse piece of bread among her 3 children, her own face a mask of weary resignation. This contrast is the engine of the story we are about to explore. Historians still debate whether the crisis was a result of systemic incompetence or a series of unfortunate but unavoidable events, like bad harvests and costly wars. The psychological tension between these two worlds, the opulent cage and the empty plate, is stretching to its breaking point. Something has to give. You leave the crowded street and the scent of desperation behind, but the feeling of unease follows you. It's a low hum of energy, a vibration in the very air of Paris. You find yourself drawn not to a palace or a slum, but to a comfortable, candlelit room. This is a salon, the intellectual battleground of the old regime. Here, aristocrats with surprisingly open minds mingle with sharp-witted lawyers, scientists, and writers from the rising middle class, the bourgeoisie. The air smells of wine, ink, and melting wax. You watch as a woman, the salonier, expertly guides the conversation, her fan a subtle instrument for punctuation and gentle mockery. There is a thrill here, a sense of shared, secret knowledge. They are not talking about court gossip or the latest fashion in wigs. They are dissecting the very nature of reality. This is the world of the Enlightenment, a revolution of the mind that precedes the one in the streets. You listen as a man with a clever, mocking glint in his eye quotes the famous writer Voltaire. He argues that tradition, faith, and monarchy should all be subjected to the cold, hard light of reason. Why, he asks the room, should a king have absolute power simply because his father was also a king? It's a simple question, but in this world, it's a dangerous one. It challenges an order that has stood for 1,000 years. It's the psychological equivalent of pointing out the emperor has no clothes, and realizing he might not even have a good tailor. Then, the conversation shifts to another name, Rousseau. A young lawyer speaks with quiet passion about the social contract. The idea is radical, yet feels instinctively true. Government, he argues, is not a power imposed from heaven, but a contract, an agreement between people to be governed for the collective good. If the ruler breaks that contract, if they become a tyrant, then the people have not just the right, but the duty to break it to him. You can feel the shift in the room as this idea lands. It reframes everyone's identity. You are not a subject, a passive piece in a king's grand game. You are a citizen, a stakeholder with inherent rights and a voice. It's a powerful psychological transformation from passive acceptance to active participation. These ideas spread through pamphlets, plays, and the monumental work known as the Encyclopedia, a multi-volume attempt to catalogue all human knowledge. Many of these texts were officially banned, a fact that only made them more desirable. An eccentric curiosity of the time was the cat-and-mouse game played by publishers, who would often print radical books with misleading titles and covers, disguising a political treatise as a dull collection of sermons. Owning one felt like holding a little piece of the future. Historians still debate the true reach of these philosophies. Did the average farmer starving in the countryside truly care about the separation of powers, or was his anger far more primal? Yet, the ideas were in the water supply. They created a shared language of liberty, rights, and popular sovereignty that would soon be shouted in the streets, a vocabulary for a revolution that hadn't yet realized it could speak. The hum of new ideas fades as you are pulled back into the cold reality of governance. You are now in a private study within the Palace of Versailles, a room far from the public splendor of the Hall of Mirrors. The air here is heavy with the scent of old paper, leather-bound books, and the faint, nervous sweat of a man in an impossible position. This is the world of King Louis XVI. You see him at his desk, a man who looks more like a kindly locksmith than an absolute monarch. He is not a tyrant in the classic sense. He is a man burdened by a crown he seems ill-suited to wear, a good man facing a very bad balance sheet. The kingdom is on the verge of bankruptcy. France's financial crisis is a famously known fact, a slow-motion catastrophe decades in the making. Imagine a national credit card, used for generations to fund extravagant court life. Remember those parties and that miniature ship in the Duchess's hair, and to pay for expensive foreign wars, most notably helping the Americans win their independence from the British. Now, the bill has come due, and the interest payments alone are crippling. The king's finance minister, a man named Colony, presents a thick report. His solution is elegant, logical, and politically explosive. He proposes a new land tax, a single uniform tax to be paid by everyone, including the first and second estates, the nobility and the clergy. This is a direct assault on the very foundation of the old order, on centuries of privilege. It is asking the shareholders to finally contribute to the company they own. The king, to his credit, understands the necessity of this, but he is a hesitant ruler, a man who desperately wants to be loved. He fears forcing this measure through, so he makes a fateful decision, a desperate gamble. Instead of imposing the tax by royal decree, he decides to seek approval from the elite themselves. He summons what is called the Assembly of Notables, a hand-picked council of the most powerful archbishops, nobles, and magistrates in the kingdom. The psychological play is clear. He is appealing to their sense of duty, hoping that this exclusive club of powerful men will see the logic and patriotically agree to save the nation. You watch as they gather, a sea of silk, velvet, and righteous indignation. An eccentric detail often lost to history is that Coligny himself was a notorious spendthrift, a man who had funded his own lavish lifestyle and that of his courtier friends with public money, making his sudden sermon on fiscal responsibility ring incredibly hollow to the assembled aristocrats. They listen to his proposals, and almost universally, they refuse. They are not against the idea of France being saved, of course, but they are very much against the idea of them being the ones to pay for it. They attack Coligny personally, question his figures, and wrap their self-interest in the noble language of tradition and ancient rites. Historians still debate the king's role in this failure. Was he a genuine, if weak, reformer betrayed by a selfish elite? Or was he a clumsy autocrat who fundamentally misunderstood the men he had appointed? Either way, the assembly of notables ends in a resounding failure. The king is forced to dismiss them, his authority weakened, his last, best hope for a peaceful solution gone. The door has closed on reform from the top, and in doing so, another door has just been opened, one that leads to a much larger, much more unpredictable room. The king's gamble has failed, and the ripples of that failure spread outwards from Versailles, creating a strange mix of anxiety and excitement across the kingdom. With his authority bruised and his treasury still empty, Louis XVI is forced to play his final card. He does something no French king has done in 175 years. He summons the Estates General. It is a monumental announcement, a historical fact that lands like a thunderclap. For the first time in generations, the people will have a voice. You feel the collective intake of breath across the nation. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar emotion, begins to bubble up from the streets and fields. You watch as communities all over France gather to elect their representatives and, just as importantly, to compile their cahiers de doléances, or notebooks of grievances. This is an incredible, kingdom-wide therapy session. Thousands of these notebooks are filled, capturing the soul of a nation on the brink. They contain grand calls for liberty and fair taxation, but an eccentric and charming curiosity is the sheer variety of complaints. Alongside demands for a constitution, you find a village pleading for a solution to a neighbor's noisy dog, another complaining about the local lord's pigeons eating their crops, and countless others decrying the hated salt tax. The gabelle. It is a portrait of a people bursting with things to say, finally given a pen. The delegates make their way to Versailles, and the great day of the opening procession arrives. You are there, in the crowd, watching them pass. The spectacle is designed to reinforce the ancient order, a visual lesson in hierarchy. First comes the clergy, the first estate, in their magnificent clerical robes. Then the nobility, the second estate, swaggering in silks, plumed hats, and swords at their sides. And then, you see them, the third estate. By royal decree, they are required to dress in simple, solemn black, like a flock of crows following a parade of peacocks. The psychological message is brutally clear. You are the commoners. You are less. But something unexpected happens. Seeing them all together, this sea of 600 men in sober black does not diminish them. Instead, it unifies them. It makes them look serious, professional, and numerous. They are the visual embodiment of the nation's workforce, its intellect, its future. They gather in a grand hall, but the initial hope quickly sours over a single, critical question. How will they vote? The aristocracy and the clergy insist on the traditional method, voting by order. This means each of the three estates gets one single vote. The first and second estates, the privileged few, could always vote together, defeating the third estate 2-1. It's a system designed to ensure nothing ever changes. The third estate, however, demands voting by head, where each representative gets a vote. Since they had successfully argued for double representation, they have as many delegates as the other two combined. Simple math would give them a fighting chance. This isn't just a procedural debate, it's a battle for the soul of France. Is it a kingdom of three separate classes, or a nation of 25 million equal citizens? Historians still debate if a quick compromise from the king at this moment could have steered the revolution down a more moderate path, but the king hesitates, the nobles dig in their heels, and the Third Estate finds itself locked in a stalemate, growing more frustrated and more unified with each passing day. You can feel the thick, stagnant air of early summer in Versailles. For 6 long weeks, the deadlock has continued. The Third Estate has refused to conduct any business, to even verify their credentials, until the other 2 orders agree to meet and vote with them as a single body. They gather each day in their hall, a vast, echoing chamber, and wait. The psychological toll is immense. Hope is curdling into a bitter frustration. The king, indecisive as ever, remains silent, fueling rumors that he is siding with the nobles, that he will dissolve the assembly altogether. The stage is set for a confrontation, a test of wills between a hesitant king and a newly awakened people. On the morning of June 20th, the delegates of the Third Estate make their way to their meeting hall as usual. But today is different. You walk with them, feeling the damp chill in the air as the light rain begins to fall. As you approach the building, you see them, royal soldiers, standing with grim faces, barring the entrance. The heavy oak doors are locked shut. A hastily posted sign declares the hall is closed for repairs, a lie so transparent it feels like a slap in the face. The message is clear. The king is finally making his move. He is shutting them down. Panic and outrage ripple through the crowd of black-clad men. Voices rise in anger. Are they to be dismissed like schoolchildren, sent home in disgrace? For a moment, there is chaos. The men huddle together under the grey, drizzling sky, their unity forged in defiance, now threatened by a shared sense of powerlessness. But then, a voice cuts through the noise. It belongs to a respected Parisian deputy, a physician named Joseph Guillotine. Yes, the very same man whose name would later become tragically synonymous with the more mechanical solution to political disputes. He suggests they find another place to meet, somewhere the king cannot lock them out of. He knows of a nearby building, a large, open space, where the nobles often play a game called Jeu de Paume, a precursor to modern tennis. An idea takes hold. A surge of defiant energy electrifies the crowd. You follow as hundreds of delegates march through the wet streets of Versailles, a solemn, determined procession moving away from the heart of royal power. They arrive at the indoor tennis court. The space is nothing like their grand assembly hall. It is vast, empty, and utilitarian, with bare walls, a dirt floor, and a high ceiling with windows letting in the gloomy daylight. There is no throne, no dais, no gilded decoration. It is a neutral space, a blank canvas, and in that moment, it becomes theirs. They scramble to find a table to serve as a podium for their president, Jean-Sylvain Bailly. He climbs onto it, looking out over the sea of determined faces. The famous oath is then sworn. Bailly raises his right hand, his voice ringing out in the cavernous room, proposing they all take a solemn vow, never to separate, and to reassemble wherever circumstances require, until the constitution of the kingdom is established. A roar of approval erupts. One by one, the delegates raise their own hands, their voices joining in a thunderous chorus, a wave of sound and commitment that seems to shake the very walls. Historians still debate the level of spontaneity in this moment, questioning if it was a masterstroke of political theater planned by canny leaders. But for the men in that room, the feeling is one of pure, unscripted defiance. They are no longer the Third Estate, waiting for permission. They have declared themselves the National Assembly, the legitimate voice of the French people. Their authority born not from a king, but from a promise made to each other on a rainy day in a tennis court. The echo of the oath taken on the tennis court reaches Paris, not as a clear promise, but as a distorted rumor carried on the summer wind. You are now in the heart of the city, and the atmosphere is electric, a strange combination of festival and funeral. The political drama in Versailles feels a world away, yet its consequences are gathering like storm clouds overhead. The king, in a typical display of confused strategy, has seemingly backed down. officially recognizing the National Assembly. But at the same time, you see his true intentions marching into the city. Swiss and German mercenary regiments, loyal only to the king's coin, are massing on the outskirts of Paris. Their presence is a constant, quiet threat. It feels less like a king protecting his capital, and more like a jailer reinforcing the prison walls. Fear and suspicion are the new currency of Paris. In the cafes and public gardens, orators stand on tables, their voices roar with passion, spinning tales of aristocratic plots and impending massacres. The most famous known fact triggering the explosion is the king's dismissal of his popular finance minister, Jacques Necker. For the people, Necker was their man at court, a symbol of reform. His firing is seen as the final signal, the prelude to an attack. The city erupts. You are swept up in a tide of humanity, a river of bodies flowing through the streets. The immediate, desperate need is for weapons. The crowd, a chaotic mix of shopkeepers, artisans, and laborers, first surges towards Les Invalides, a home and hospital for old soldiers, which also houses a massive armory. They seize tens of thousands of muskets, but find almost no gunpowder, and everyone knows where the city's largest store of gunpowder is kept. You turn with the crowd, and your eyes fall upon it, a dark stone monster dominating the eastern skyline. The Bastille, it is more than a fortress, it is a symbol, a physical manifestation of royal despotism and arbitrary power. Its 8 looming towers, a constant reminder of the king's might. As the crowd surrounds its massive walls, something happens to you. The sense of individual identity begins to blur. You are no longer a tailor or a baker with a family and a name. You are an anonymous face in a crowd of thousands, shouting with one voice, driven by one purpose. This is the psychological phenomenon of de-individuation. The sheer size of the group diffuses responsibility. The fear you might have felt alone is replaced by a collective, intoxicating rage. The consequences of your actions feel distant, as the actions themselves belong not to you, but to the mob. The siege is a messy, desperate affair. Sporadic gunfire cracks the air. A few cannons, dragged from Les Invalides, are fired with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Finally, after hours of chaotic fighting, the garrison surrenders. The crowd pours in, a human flood. And here lies the eccentric curiosity of the event. They were expecting to find hundreds of political prisoners, martyrs languishing in chains. Instead, they found only 7 men, including 4 forgers and 2 individuals deemed mentally unstable. The true prize was the gunpowder. Historians still debate whether the storming of the Bastille was a strategic act aimed at securing munitions for the city's defense, or a purely symbolic act of popular fury against a hated institution. Regardless of the intent, its fall was a psychological earthquake. A fortress that had stood for centuries, a symbol of unshakable power, was brought down in an afternoon by an angry mob. The echo of its falling stones would be heard across all of France, and indeed, across the world. The sound of falling stone in Paris becomes a whisper by the time it reaches the countryside, a story that grows darker and more twisted with every telling. You are no longer in the claustrophobic, charged streets of the capital. You are surrounded by an endless ocean of wheat, golden and shimmering under the oppressive heat of the late summer sun. The air is thick with the scent of dust and dry earth. Life here is slower, governed by the sun and the seasons. But the news from Paris, garbled and terrifying, has introduced a new, unnatural rhythm. It speaks of the king's power broken, of soldiers turning on the people, of chaos unleashed. This lack of clear information creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushes the oldest and most powerful of human emotions, fear. A rumor begins to circulate, a poisonous seed planted in fertile ground. It whispers that the aristocrats, furious at losing their power, have hired armies of brigands, ruthless mercenaries, to march through the countryside, burning the harvest and slaughtering the peasants in their homes. It is a conspiracy theory, but it feels terrifyingly plausible to a people who have felt the noble's boot on their neck for centuries. This is the anatomy of mass hysteria, a psychological contagion that spreads faster than any disease. You see it begin in a village market. A frantic traveler tells a story he heard in the last town, and the story is repeated, embellished, and passed on. The fear is a spark that catches on the dry tinder of anxiety. Soon, the village priest rings the tocsin, the church bell, not as a call to prayer, but as a warning. The sound carries across the fields, and the next village rings their bell in response. A chain reaction of pure panic. The great fear, as it would come to be known, has begun. You see them emerge from their cottages, the ordinary farmers and laborers. They are armed not with muskets, but with the tools of their harvest. Pitchforks, sickles, and heavy scythes become weapons, their familiar weight now feeling menacing and purposeful. Their faces are a mixture of terror and grim determination. They gather in the village square, a makeshift militia ready to defend their homes against an enemy they have never seen. An eccentric and revealing curiosity of this time is that the phantom brigands almost never arrived. Patrols would be sent out, men would stand guard all night, but the marauding armies were nowhere to be found. The enemy was a ghost. And so, this enormous coiled spring of collective fear and aggression, finding no other outlet, pivots towards a real, tangible target. If the aristocrats are trying to destroy you, you will destroy their power first. The mob turns its attention to the local chateau, the stone symbol of feudal authority that looms over their village. You march with them, a sea of angry farmers. You are not there for silver or blood. You are there for paper and ink. You storm the Lord's manor, find his archives, and drag out the dusty feudal records, the charters that list every tax, every duty, every ounce of labor your family has owed his for generations. You build a great bonfire in the courtyard and watch the pages curl and turn to ash, the ink of your servitude vanishing into the summer sky. Historians still debate whether the Great Fear was a truly spontaneous explosion of peasant rage, or if it was subtly encouraged by revolutionary agitators from the cities. But for you, in this moment, it feels like a necessary, cleansing fire. The smoke from the bonfires in the countryside drifts back towards Versailles, carrying with it a clear and urgent message. The old world is burning. You are back within the walls of the newly named National Constituent Assembly. The mood is a strange cocktail of triumph and terror. The deputies are thrilled by the energy of the people, the fall of the Bastille, the peasant uprisings. These are confirmations of their own revolutionary legitimacy, but they are also deeply frightened. The chaos of the Great Fear shows them a revolution that could easily spiral out of control, a beast that could consume them as easily as it consumes a feudal charter. They realize they must act, and act decisively, not just to dismantle the old system, but to create a new one in its place. They need a statement of principles, a mission statement for the new France. The task falls to a committee, which includes a young, idealistic nobleman who is already a hero of the American Revolution, the Marquis de Lafayette. You watch them work, surrounded by books and drafts, the air humming with the intellectual energy of Rousseau and Voltaire, a feeling we witnessed earlier in the salons of Paris. They are not inventing these ideas from scratch. They are distilling them, trying to capture the lightning of the Enlightenment in the bottle of a legal document. The result is one of the most famous documents in human history, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. You listen as it is read aloud to the assembly. The words are simple, elegant, and earth-shattering. Men are born and remain free and equal in rights. It's a single sentence that demolishes 1,000 years of French history, a society built on the very idea that men are born unequal, destined for different stations in life. The Declaration goes on to list these rights: liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. It declares that sovereignty resides not in a king, but in the nation itself. It establishes equality before the law, freedom of speech, and a presumption of innocence. It is a document of profound psychological power. It gives a formal language to the vague feelings of injustice that have simmered for generations. Your resentment of the local noble is no longer just a personal grievance, it is a violation of your natural rights. Your hunger is not just bad luck, it is a failure of a government that has broken its social contract. It transforms a riot into a revolution, a complaint into a philosophy, an eccentric and often forgotten curiosity. About its creation is the fierce debate over whether to include a corresponding declaration of duties. Some conservative deputies argued that proclaiming rights without responsibilities would lead to anarchy. They were ultimately overruled, a decision that underscored the radical optimism of the moment. Yet, as you look around the assembly, you notice a strange silence. The declaration speaks of man and citizen, but there is no mention of women. It speaks of freedom, but says nothing about the hundreds of thousands of enslaved people in France's colonies. Historians still debate the true intentions of the authors. Were they conscious hypocrites, deliberately excluding vast segments of the population? Or were they simply men of their time, their vision of universality unconsciously limited by the prejudices of their era? For now, the Declaration stands as a beacon of universal ideals, a blueprint for a new society based on reason and justice. But the king, holed up in Versailles, still refuses to officially approve it. The beautiful words on the page are not yet the law of the land, and the revolution, you sense, has another great storm to weather. The beautiful words of the Declaration hang in the autumn air, but they cannot fill an empty stomach. You are back in the markets of Paris, and the situation has grown even more dire. The political uncertainty and the chaos of the summer have disrupted the grain supply. The price of bread, that ever-present barometer of public mood, has soared once again. The promises of the revolution feel distant and abstract when your children are crying from hunger. The anger in the city is no longer a generalized rage against the system. It has a specific target, the king and queen, who remain secluded in Versailles, a world away from the suffering of their people. Rumors fly that they are hoarding grain, that they are plotting a counter-revolution with the aristocrats. This time, the spark of rebellion is not lit by politicians or philosophers. It is lit by the women of Paris. You see them in the marketplace, their faces etched with a fierce, protective anger that only a mother can know. They are fishwives, laundresses, and seamstresses, women used to hard labor and loud arguments. They are the managers of the household economy, the ones who have to stretch a few coins to feed a family. They have had enough. The movement begins as a protest, a demand for bread, but it quickly grows into something more. A wave of women, thousands strong, begins to march. You are swept up in their energy. They are armed with whatever they can find, kitchen knives, rolling pins, and broomsticks. Some of them drag a cannon from the city hall, a symbol of their serious intent. Their destination is Versailles, a 12-mile walk in the pouring rain. They are going to see the king. They are going to bring him back to Paris, where they can keep an eye on him. It is a stunning display of collective action, a physical manifestation of the popular will. As they march, their numbers swell. Men from the National Guard, the citizen militia, join them, not to stop them, but to escort them. Their commander, Lafayette, reluctantly swept along by the will of his own soldiers. You arrive at Versailles, a muddy, bedraggled, and furious army. The opulence of the palace is an insult to your empty stomach. The guards are overwhelmed. You watch as a delegation of the women is finally allowed into the assembly, and then into the king's presence. An eccentric curiosity of this encounter is that one young woman, chosen to speak for the group, was so overwhelmed by the presence of the king that she fainted at his feet. Louis, in a rare moment of charm, helped her up and promised to provide all the grain in Versailles to the people of Paris. But a promise of bread is no longer enough. The crowd outside is chanting. Their demand is singular. To Paris, to Paris. They stay all night, a menacing, rain-soaked vigil. The next morning, the palace itself is stormed. The Queen, Marie Antoinette, a famous target of popular hatred, is forced to flee her chambers just moments before the mob breaks in, destroying her bed with pikes. To calm the crowd, she must appear on a balcony, a terrifying, lonely figure, facing a sea of angry faces. Finally, the king relents. He agrees to return to Paris. You watch the procession, one of the most surreal in history. The royal carriage, containing the king, queen, and their children, is escorted by the massive crowd. At the front, guards carry pikes, and on the tips of the pikes are the heads of two of the king's bodyguards who were killed in the fighting. The women marched alongside, cheering and singing. They are not just bringing back the king, they say they are bringing back the baker, the baker's wife, and the baker's boy. The psychological shift is monumental. The king is no longer a remote, godlike figure. He is a hostage of his own people, a prisoner in his own capital. Historians still debate the level of organization behind the march. Was it a spontaneous popular uprising, or was it cunningly orchestrated by political factions who wanted the king in Paris for their own ends? Whatever the truth, the balance of power has irrevocably shifted from the gilded halls of Versailles to the hungry streets of Paris. For nearly 2 years, you have watched the king live as a gilded prisoner in the Tuileries Palace in Paris. The grandeur is still there, the velvet drapes, the loyal servants, but it is a cage nonetheless. Remember the women who dragged him from Versailles, the baker brought back to feed his people. Now, his every move is watched, his every decree scrutinized by the assembly. He is a king who reigns but does not rule, a living symbol whose power is draining away with each passing day. The psychological pressure on the royal family is immense, a constant, low-grade fear mixed with the humiliation of their lost authority. For a man raised to believe his will was law, this is an unbearable existence. A secret, desperate plan begins to form in the quiet, candlelit rooms of the palace after dark. The plan is to flee, to escape Paris, travel eastward across France to the fortress of Montmorency, near the border. There, a loyal general waits with an army, and beyond him lies the Austrian Netherlands, the homeland of the Queen, Marie Antoinette. From this position of strength, the king believes he can renegotiate with the revolution, perhaps even inspire a loyalist uprising to restore his power. The night of the escape arrives, shrouded in secrecy. You watch as the royal family, disguised as the entourage of a Russian baroness, slips out of the palace one by one. The king himself is dressed as a valet. It is a moment of incredible tension, a gamble for their lives and the future of France. But the plan is plagued by a fatal disconnect from reality, a series of blunders that feel almost like a dark comedy. The most eccentric and telling detail is their choice of vehicle. Instead of using two small, fast, inconspicuous carriages, they commissioned a single, enormous, and very comfortable coach, a brand new berline, painted a conspicuous dark green. It is slow, heavy, and draws attention everywhere it goes. They are trying to be discreet while traveling in the 18th century equivalent of a luxury tour bus, a choice that speaks volumes about their inability to grasp the gravity of their situation. The journey is a cascade of delays. The military escorts arranged to meet them are in the wrong places or are chased away by suspicious villagers. The slow-moving coach falls hours and hours behind schedule, but the famous fatal mistake happens in the small town of Set. As the coach stops to change horses, the local postmaster, a fiercely patriotic man named Jean-Baptiste Drout, looks at the face of the man disguised as a valet. There is something familiar about him. Drout then glances at a piece of the new revolutionary paper money, an assignat, which bears the king's portrait. The face on the paper and the face in the coach are the same. In a stunning moment of recognition, the king is unmasked by his own image, a symbol of the very revolution he is trying to escape. Drout rides like a man possessed, taking a shortcut across the woods to the next town, Versailles, and alerts the authorities. When the royal coach rumbles into the dark, sleeping town, they find the bridge blocked by a cart and the street filled with armed men from the local National Guard. The escape is over. The psychological impact of this failure is impossible to overstate. When the news reaches Paris, a stunned silence gives way to pure fury. The king had not just tried to escape, he had left behind a letter denouncing the revolution. He was not a reluctant father of his people. He was a traitor, fleeing to join the nation's enemies. Historians still debate whether Louis intended to launch a full-scale civil war, or simply to find a safe haven from which to negotiate. But for the French people, the distinction is meaningless. The trust, the last fragile thread connecting the monarchy to the nation, has been decisively severed. The massive green coach, now an object of national scorn, rumbles back towards Paris. You are in the crowd lining the road, watching its slow, humiliating progress. The National Assembly has decreed that the return journey should be conducted in absolute silence. No cheers, no insults. The silence is more damning than any jeer, a cold, heavy blanket of disapproval. You see the king's face in the window, pale and defeated. The failed flight to Valence has shattered a powerful illusion. For centuries, the king was the sacred father of the nation, his body both a person and a symbol of France itself. Now, he is just a man, a failed fugitive named Louis Cap. This power vacuum, this crisis of identity for the nation, creates the perfect environment for a new kind of power to flourish. You find yourself drawn to the political clubs that are springing up all over Paris. They are the engines of the next phase of the revolution. You enter the former monastery of the Jacobin, a vast, cold stone hall that now echoes with the fiery speeches of passionate revolutionaries. This is the home of the Jacobin Club, the most famous and influential of them all. The air is thick with the scent of cheap wine and righteous anger. Here, men like Maximilien Robespierre, a fastidious lawyer from the provinces, are honing their political skills, their voices growing stronger and more radical with each passing week. You listen to the debates, and you can feel the intense psychological dynamics of in-group and out-group formation at play. To be a Jacobin is to belong to a brotherhood of the pure, the true patriots. Everyone else, the moderates, the royalists, the undecided, are increasingly seen not just as opponents, but as enemies, as traitors to the cause. This intense group loyalty provides a sense of certainty and purpose in a world where all the old certainties have been destroyed. It's a powerful, intoxicating feeling. Then you visit another club, the home of a rival faction that will come to be known as the Girondins. They are also patriots, also republicans, but their style is different. They are more philosophical, more moderate in their language, many of them hailing from the wealthy port cities of the provinces. They fear the raw, chaotic energy of the Parisian mob, the very energy the Jacobin are learning to harness. The debates between these factions, which begin as differences of opinion, will soon harden into life or death struggles. This splitting of the revolutionary movement into warring factions is a widely known historical fact, the origin story of the political terms left and right, based on where the deputies chose to sit in the National Assembly. An eccentric curiosity of this period is the proliferation of revolutionary newspapers, a chaotic explosion of free press. Dozens of papers with names like L'Ami du Peuple, the Friend of the People, and La Perdushin, Old Man Dushin, compete for the public's attention. They are vicious, personal, and incredibly influential, filled with radical proposals, conspiracy theories, and savage attacks on political enemies. They are the social media of their day, shaping public opinion and fanning the flames of political division. Historians still debate whether these clubs and newspapers were a healthy expression of a new democratic culture or a dangerous catalyst for the extremism that was to come. For now, you can feel the revolutionary fervor being channeled, organized, and weaponized. The general, passionate anger of 1789 is being replaced by the disciplined, ideological fury of 1792. The internal arguments of the political clubs, the fierce debates between Jacobin and Girondins, suddenly seem small. A new, much larger threat is gathering on the borders of France. You can feel the collective gaze of the nation turning outwards, a shift from internal squabbles to a shared external enemy. The crowned heads of Europe, the kings and emperors of Austria and Prussia, have been watching the events in France with growing alarm. The French Revolution is not just a domestic problem, it is a dangerous idea, a virus of liberty that could infect their own people. The King of Prussia and the Holy Roman Emperor issued the Declaration of Pillnitz, a vaguely worded but ominous threat to restore the French monarchy by force if necessary. Back in Paris, this threat is received not with fear, but with a strange, defiant enthusiasm. In the Legislative Assembly, the new governing body that has replaced the National Assembly, a faction led by the Girondins begins to argue passionately for a preemptive war. Their psychological reasoning is complex and potent. A war, they argue, will do two things. First, it will flush out the traitors at home. The king, the queen, the reactionary nobles, they will all be forced to show their true colors. A war will be the ultimate loyalty test. Second, it will be a revolutionary crusade, a mission to export the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity to the oppressed peoples of Europe. They will not be conquerors, but liberators. It is an intoxicating vision, a grand romantic narrative that appeals to the nation's newfound sense of pride and purpose. Only a small, lonely voice speaks out against it. You see him at the rostrum of the Jacobin Club, a small, immaculately dressed man with a cold, clear logic. It is Robespierre. He warns that war will put too much power in the hands of generals, that no one loves an armed missionary, and that the revolution is too fragile to survive such a gamble. He is ignored. The war fever is too strong. In April 1792, France declares war on Austria, a decision that will engulf Europe in conflict for over 2 decades. This is a famous historical turning point, the moment the revolution goes global. The war begins disastrously. The French army, disorganized by the flight of many of its aristocratic officers, is poorly led and ill-equipped. They are quickly defeated in their first battles, and a sense of panic grips Paris. The enemy is not being pushed back, they are advancing towards the city. This fear of invasion creates an intense, paranoid atmosphere. The external threat amplifies the internal one. Every misfortune, every defeat at the front, is blamed on a conspiracy at home. An Austrian committee led by the Queen, Marie Antoinette, supposedly sabotaging the war effort from within. An eccentric curiosity of this period is the birth of a new song, a marching anthem written for the army of the Rhine. It is fierce, patriotic, and incredibly bloodthirsty, calling for the impure blood of the enemy to water the fields of France. The song is called La Marseillaise, and it will become the national anthem, a perfect encapsulation of the defiant, violent energy of the moment. The threat of invasion has a powerful unifying effect. It creates a clear us versus them mentality that simplifies all the complex political issues. To be a patriot is to support the war. To question the war is to be a traitor. Historians still debate the Girondins' motives for war. Were they cynical politicians using a foreign conflict to secure their own power, or were they genuine idealists who truly believed in a crusade for liberty? Whatever their intent, they have unleashed forces they cannot control. The war will not save the moderates. It will radicalize the revolution beyond their wildest imaginings, demanding ever greater displays of patriotism and ever harsher punishments for those deemed enemies of the nation. The summer of 1792 is a season of unbearable heat and even more unbearable tension. The disastrous news from the war front, the constant fear of Prussian invaders at the gates of Paris, and the simmering rage against the king, who is now openly seen as a traitor, all combine to create a psychological pressure cooker. The air is thick with rumors of plots and counterplots. You feel the city holding its breath, waiting for something to break. The breaking point comes in the form of a document from the enemy, the Brunswick Manifesto. It is a proclamation issued by the commander of the invading army, promising that if the French royal family is harmed, he will inflict an exemplary vengeance and burn Paris to the ground. This threat, intended to cow the revolutionaries into submission, has the exact opposite effect. It is a spark thrown into a powder keg. It confirms every suspicion, every conspiracy theory. The king is in league with the enemy, his life held up as a shield for the invaders. The rage of the people, which has been building for months, finally boils over. On August 10th, the Tuileries Palace is stormed by a massive, organized mob of Parisian radicals, the sans-culottes, and revolutionary soldiers from the provinces. After a bloody battle with the king's Swiss guard, the palace falls. The monarchy is effectively overthrown. The king and his family are taken prisoner and locked away in a grim fortress known as the Temple. But the fear does not recede. In fact, it intensifies. With the king gone, the enemy advance continues. The fortress of Verdun, the last major obstacle on the road to Paris, falls. Panic grips the city. The revolutionary leaders, men like Georges Danton, a booming, charismatic orator, try to channel this fear into patriotic fervor, calling for every able-bodied man to march to the front. But this creates a new, terrifying problem. If all the patriots leave to fight, who will guard the city from the enemies within? The city's prisons are overflowing with suspected counter-revolutionaries, aristocrats, priests who refuse to swear an oath to the new government, and common criminals. A new, horrifying rumor begins to spread. The prisoners are going to break out, slaughter the families of the volunteers who have gone to war, and hand the city over to the Prussians. It is the logic of the Great Fear, which you witnessed in the countryside, now transplanted to an urban, political setting. A wave of preemptive violence begins. For 5 days in early September, organized bands of sans-culottes move from prison to prison, dragging out the inmates. They set up impromptu courts, quick, terrifying trials that often last only minutes. Then, the killing starts. You witness a scene of grim, methodical butchery. Prisoners are hacked to death with swords, pikes, and meat cleavers in the prison courtyards. This is the September Massacres, a famous and horrifying episode of the Revolution. An eccentric and macabre curiosity of the massacres is the story of the Princess de Lamballe, a close friend of Marie Antoinette. After she was killed, her head was severed, her hair was curled and powdered by a hairdresser, and then it was paraded on a pike to the window of the Queen's prison cell. This act of personalized, symbolic brutality reveals the deep-seated hatred that had been unleashed. The massacres represent a dark psychological turning point. This is not the spontaneous rage of the Bastille. It is a more calculated, more systematic violence, justified by a paranoid logic that sees extermination as a form of self-defense. Historians still debate the extent to which revolutionary leaders like Danton and Marat orchestrated or simply condoned the killings. But regardless of who gave the orders, the message was clear. The revolution would now defend itself by any means necessary, and the line between justice and vengeance was beginning to disappear entirely. The blood has been washed from the prison courtyards, but its stain remains on the soul of the revolution. You are in a new assembly hall, the home of the National Convention, a body elected by universal male suffrage to write a new constitution for France. Their very first act is momentous, a decision that feels both inevitable and shocking. They formally abolish the monarchy and declare France a republic. 1,000 years of history, of kings ruling by the grace of God, is ended with a simple vote. The crowd in the public galleries erupts in a roar of approval. The psychological weight of the crown, which has defined France for its entire existence, has been lifted. But this new beginning is haunted by a question from the past. What is to be done with the man who used to be king? The man now known simply as Citizen Louis Capet. He is a prisoner, but his very existence is a threat. To the royalists, he is a living symbol of the old regime, a potential rallying point for a counter-revolution. To the most radical revolutionaries, he is a traitor who must pay the ultimate price for his crimes. The convention is deeply divided. The Girondins, the moderates who once championed the war, now shrank from this final, irrevocable step. They argue for a trial, certainly, but perhaps the punishment should be exile or imprisonment. They fear that executing the king will plunge France into a civil war and turn all of Europe against them. The Jacobins, led by Robespierre and the fiery young orator Louis-Antoine de Saint-Just, argue with a cold, relentless logic. For them, this is not a matter of justice in a normal court of law. The king's guilt is not in question. His crime was being a king. As Saint Just chillingly declares, one cannot reign innocently. To put the king on trial is to put the revolution itself on trial. If the king is innocent, then the revolution is guilty. They demand a vote, not on his guilt, but on his punishment, and they demand that punishment be death. You watch as the trial unfolds, a piece of high political theater. Louis is brought before the convention, no longer in royal robes, but in a simple dark coat. He is composed, dignified, and surprisingly well-spoken as he defends himself against the charges of treason. But the outcome is a foregone conclusion. After weeks of debate, the votes are cast. A narrow but clear majority votes for death without appeal. This is a famous historical fact, the moment of no return. The day of the execution arrives. It is a cold, foggy January morning. You are in a vast, silent crowd in what was once the Place Louis XV, now renamed the Place de la Révolution. In the center of the square stands the new instrument of justice, the guillotine. Its tall wooden frame and angled blade are stark against the gray sky. The king is brought in a carriage, his hands tied behind his back. He mounts the scaffold with a steady step. He tries to address the crowd, his voice firm. I die innocent of all the crimes laid to my charge. But the commander of the National Guard, a man named Santerre, orders a drum roll, and the king's last words are lost in the thunderous noise. The execution itself is quick, mechanical, and impersonal. The blade falls. A young guard lifts the severed head by its hair and shows it to the crowd. An eccentric curiosity of the moment is the bizarre, almost religious fervor that follows. People push forward, dipping handkerchiefs and scraps of paper in the king's blood, wanting a relic from this monumental event. The execution of a king, an act that was once unthinkable, has been done. The revolution has cut its final tie to the past. Historians still debate the political necessity of the execution. Was it a crucial act that solidified the Republic, or a needless act of vengeance that unleashed the terror? In this moment, all you feel is the profound, terrifying silence that follows an act from which there is no turning back. The silence after the king's head fell does not last long. It is quickly filled by the sounds of war drums and the sharpening of steel. The execution of a monarch, an act the revolutionaries saw as the final victory of the people, is seen by the rest of Europe as an unforgivable crime, a declaration of war against civilization itself. A grand coalition of European powers, led by Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Spain, forms to crush the infant French Republic. At the same time, within France, a brutal civil war erupts in the western region of the Vendée, a peasant-led rebellion in the name of God and the murdered king. The Republic is under siege, from without and within. The revolution is in danger of being strangled in its cradle. In this moment of supreme crisis, you see power in Paris become concentrated like never before. The convention, the large chaotic body of elected representatives, delegates its executive power to a small group of 12 men who meet in a green-walled room in the Tuileries Palace. They are the Committee of Public Safety. For the next year, these 12 men will rule France as a collective dictatorship, working around the clock, fueled by coffee and a fanatical sense of purpose. And at their heart, you find a familiar face, Maximilien Robespierre. Remember the man who spoke out against the war, the voice of caution and cold logic. Now, in this crucible of fear and desperation, his time has come. He and his fellow Jacobin have a chillingly clear vision. The Republic can only be saved if it becomes a republic of virtue, a society of selfless, patriotic citizens devoted to the public good. But to achieve this perfect virtue, all its enemies must be purged. In a famous speech, Robespierre lays out the new philosophy of the revolution. In times of peace, the basis of government is virtue. In times of revolution, it is both virtue and terror. Terror, he declares, is nothing other than justice, prompt, severe, inflexible. It is an emanation of virtue, a necessary tool to cleanse the nation. This is the beginning of the reign of terror. It is a state-sanctioned wave of paranoia and violence. The Committee of Public Safety, to build their new world, even tries to remake reality itself. An eccentric and fascinating example of their ambition is the creation of the French Republican calendar. The old Gregorian calendar, with its saints' days and religious holidays, is abolished. The year 1792 becomes Year I of Liberty. The months are renamed with beautiful, poetic words based on the seasons: Brumaire for the fog, Floreal for the flowers, Thermidor for the heat. The week becomes 10 days long, a rational, decimal system designed to wipe the slate of history clean. You watch as this new, terrifying logic takes hold. The convention passes the law of suspects, a decree that makes almost anyone an enemy of the state. You can now be arrested not just for what you have done, but for what you have said, for what you have written, or even for not showing enough enthusiastic support for the revolution. The definition of a traitor becomes dangerously vague. Historians still debate the nature of the terror. Was it a desperate, pragmatic, and brutal response to the very real threats of invasion and civil war, or was it the inevitable, paranoid conclusion of an ideology that believed in a single, indivisible general will, making any dissent an act of treason? Whatever its origins, its effect is a pervasive chill that settles over the Republic. The revolution, born from a cry for liberty, is now devouring its own, and the search for enemies has just begun. The new Republic of Virtue needs a new kind of altar, and you are standing before it. In the center of the Place de la Révolution, where the statue of a king once stood, there is now a strange wooden structure. It is tall, imposing, and brutally simple. 2 upright posts, a crosspiece at the top, and suspended between them, a heavy angled blade of polished steel that catches the grey Parisian light. This is the guillotine. It is the new symbol of France, the engine of Robespierre's terror, the tool that will supposedly carve a perfect society out of the flawed material of humanity. They call it the National Razor, a name that is part grim joke, part chilling statement of purpose. It is here that the enemies of the revolution, real and imagined, will meet a swift, efficient, and very public end. The machine itself is a product of the Enlightenment, the very intellectual movement that sparked the revolution. Remember the well-meaning Dr. Guillotine from the tennis court oath, the man who wanted to find a more humane form of execution. This is his legacy. Before the revolution, executions were a gruesome theater of cruelty, spectacles of breaking on the wheel, hanging, or being drawn and quartered, punishments whose brutality varied according to the social class of the condemned. The guillotine, by contrast, was designed to be rational and egalitarian. It offered the same quick, and supposedly painless, death to a fallen queen, like Marie Antoinette, as it did to a common baker accused of hoarding bread. It is the ultimate expression of revolutionary equality, a terrifying democracy of death. You watch as the daily ritual unfolds. The spectacle becomes a routine, a normalized part of Parisian life. The executions are scheduled for the afternoon, providing a form of public entertainment. A crowd gathers, the same faces day after day. Women known as the tricoteuses sit on benches near the scaffold, knitting calmly as the heads fall, never missing a stitch. Vendors move through the crowd selling lemonade and lists of the condemned, a ghoulish program for the day's events. An eccentric and profoundly disturbing curiosity of the era is the production of miniature toy guillotines, complete with a tiny falling blade. Children would use them to execute dolls or, reportedly, mice and other small creatures. A grim game that shows how deeply this culture of sanitized violence had penetrated the public consciousness. This public spectacle casts a long shadow that reaches into every private home. The law of suspects has created a world where anyone can be an enemy, and any enemy can end up on the guillotine. You begin to watch your words, even with old friends. A joke that might have been harmless a year ago could now be interpreted as a lack of revolutionary zeal. You learn to speak the language of patriotism with performative enthusiasm. You wear the revolutionary cockade on your hat. You address everyone as citizen. You praise the latest victories of the army. all because you know you are being watched. Your neighbors, your baker, the man you buy your wine from, any of them could be an informer for the local revolutionary committee. A single denunciation, born of jealousy or a petty argument, could lead to a midnight knock on your door, a brief trial before the revolutionary tribunal, and a one-way trip to the Place de la Révolution. Historians still debate the true scale of the terror, questioning whether the public spectacle of the guillotine in Paris masked the even more brutal, less theatrical slaughters occurring in the provinces. But here in the capital, the shadow of that single-angled blade is enough to create a pervasive, silent fear that governs every aspect of daily life. The chill you feel is no longer just the winter air. It is the cold logic of the terror reaching its final, terrifying conclusion. The national razor was meant to purge the enemies of the revolution, the aristocrats, the priests, the royalists. But now, with most of them dead or in exile, the blade turns inward. The revolution, in its obsessive quest for purity, begins to devour itself. The most passionate revolutionaries, the men who built this new world, now look at each other with suspicion, seeing traitors not on the battlefield, but on the benches of the convention beside them. The great ideological battle for the soul of the Republic is now a duel between two men, two titans of the revolution who represent its warring impulses. On one side stands Robespierre, the incorruptible, the ascetic, unwavering believer in the Republic of virtue. For him, the terror is not yet complete. It must be intensified to burn away the last vestiges of corruption and selfishness. On the other side stands a familiar face, Georges Danton. Remember his booming voice, calling the nation to arms against the Prussians. He is a man of immense appetites and immense charisma, a pragmatist who believes the Republic is now safe from its external enemies and that the time has come for clemency, for an end to the bloodshed. He and his followers, the indulgents, argue for a return to something resembling normalcy. In the paranoid atmosphere of the terror, this call for moderation is a death sentence. To Robespierre's rigid mind, to slow down is to surrender, to forgive is to betray. He sees Danton's pragmatism not as a sensible policy, but as a moral failing, a sign of revolutionary fatigue that is tantamount to treason. He makes his decision. Danton, the hero of August 10th, the man who rallied France in its darkest hour, must be eliminated. You are in the convention when the unthinkable happens, when Danton and his allies are arrested. A stunned silence falls over the hall. If Danton is not safe, no one is. His trial is a show, a piece of political theater where the verdict has already been written. Danton, with his powerful voice and quick wit, tries to turn the tables on his accusers, but he is silenced. The outcome is never in doubt. You watch as he is taken in a tumbrel, one of the open carts for the condemned, towards the guillotine. He passes Robespierre's house and shouts a curse, a prophecy. "Robespierre, you will follow me." His courage does not desert him, even on the steps of the scaffold. The execution of Danton is a widely known historical fact, but his last words are an eccentric and unforgettable display of his defiant character. He speaks not to God, but to the executioner. "Don't forget to show my head to the people," he roars. It is well worth seeing. With Danton's death, the last real opposition to Robespierre is gone. The terror accelerates into its final, most intense phase, the Great Terror. The Revolutionary Tribunal is streamlined to remove any pesky legal obstacles, like the right to a defense. The pace of executions quickens, dozens a day, every day. Historians still debate whether Robespierre's attack on Danton was a cold-blooded move to eliminate a political rival or the tragic act of a true believer, convinced that any call for moderation was a betrayal of the revolution's ultimate goal. But in the fearful silence that follows Danton's execution, you see men in the convention glancing at each other, their faces pale. The fear has become absolute, and they begin to wonder who will be next. The summer of 1794 arrives, and you can feel a strange, almost surreal calm in Paris. The French armies are now victorious on all fronts. The internal rebellions have been brutally crushed. The existential threat to the Republic, the crisis that justified the terror in the first place, is gone. And yet, the guillotine in the Place de la Révolution is busier than ever. The Great Terror, unmoored from its original purpose, has become a machine that runs on its own momentum, a furnace that must be fed. You watch the daily procession of the condemned, but the faces are no longer aristocrats or priests. They are ordinary people, shopkeepers, housewives, artisans. Their crimes often nothing more than a careless word or a private grudge. Robespierre, the incorruptible, has become the high priest of this bloody religion. He seems increasingly isolated, wrapped in a cloak of self-righteous paranoia. You witness him preside over the festival of the Supreme Being, a bizarre public ceremony he orchestrated to be the crowning moment of his Republic of Virtue. Dressed in a sky-blue coat and holding a bouquet of flowers and wheat, he leads a procession through Paris, setting fire to a giant cardboard statue of atheism to reveal a statue of wisdom underneath. This famously eccentric event is meant to be a moment of national unity, a celebration of a new deistic national faith. But for many watching, it looks like the act of a man who has started to believe he is not just the leader of the Republic, but its messiah. The delegates of the convention, who are forced to march behind him, whispered jokes and insults, a sign that his absolute authority is beginning to crack. The breaking point comes with a single speech. Robespierre ascends the rostrum of the convention. He is not there to announce a victory or propose a new law. He is there to issue a threat. He speaks for hours, a rambling, venomous speech about a vast conspiracy of traitors working against the Republic. He claims to have a new list of enemies, deputies sitting right there in the hall. But then, in a fatal moment of hubris, he refuses to name them. This is a catastrophic psychological miscalculation. He intended to terrify them into submission, to make each man fear he was on the list. Instead, he unites them in a shared, desperate terror. Every man in that room, from the moderates to the former extremists, looks at his neighbor and realizes the same thing. It could be me. His silence makes them all potential victims, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. The next day, the 9th of Thermidor in the Republican calendar, the conspirators are ready. When Robespierre and his fiery young ally Saint-Just try to speak, they are shouted down. A prearranged chorus of voices rises, yelling down with the tyrant. The convention, so long cowed into silent obedience, has found its voice again. A delegate moves for the arrest of Robespierre and his inner circle. The motion passes with a thunderous, cathartic roar. The spell is broken. The fever has broken. What follows is a chaotic 24 hours, a brief and bloody power struggle on the streets of Paris. But the tide has turned. The Parisian radicals, the sans-culottes, are exhausted by the terror and do not rise to defend him. Robespierre is cornered and, in the confusion, shot in the jaw, a wound that shatters the mouth from which so many deadly speeches had come. The next day, you are back in the familiar square, watching the familiar cart. But this time, the man with the bandaged, broken jaw, unable to speak, is Robespierre himself. He is executed along with his closest allies, his death marking the definitive end of the reign of terror. Historians still debate the nature of the Thermidorian reaction. Was it a principled stand against tyranny, or a desperate act of self-preservation by men who were themselves implicated in the terror's crimes? Either way, as the blade falls on the incorruptible, a collective sigh of relief, of sheer exhaustion, sweeps across France. The blade that fell on Robespierre's neck was a punctuation mark, a full stop at the end of the revolution's most terrifying chapter. You are in a city that is slowly, cautiously, learning to breathe again. The guillotine has been quietly dismantled. The constant, gnawing fear of a midnight denunciation begins to recede. The men who overthrew Robespierre, the Thermidorians, opened the prisons and released thousands of suspects. A collective, societal unclench is palpable in the air. The intense ideological fervor of the past 2 years evaporates, replaced by a desperate, almost frantic pursuit of pleasure and profit. The Republic of Virtue is dead. Long live the Republic of getting rich and having a good time. This new era needs a new government, one designed with the express purpose of preventing another dictator from ever rising again. The result is the Directory, a famous but often misunderstood phase of the revolution. You watch as a new constitution is put in place. Power is deliberately fractured. There is a two-house legislature, and at the top, a five-man executive committee, the directors, who are chosen by the legislature. The psychological principle is clear: safety in numbers. 5 men, it is hoped, will check and balance each other, making the tyranny of one impossible. But what is designed for safety also creates weakness. You see the 5 directors, dressed in absurdly flamboyant official costumes of satin and lace, constantly squabbling, plotting against each other, and mired in corruption. The government is chronically bankrupt, the paper money is nearly worthless, and the new political class is a collection of war profiteers, speculators, and cynical survivors. The pendulum has swung from the fanatical, incorruptible virtue of Robespierre to an open, shameless pursuit of wealth. An eccentric and visually striking curiosity of this period is the emergence of a new youth subculture among the newly rich, the incroyables, and the merveilleuses. These unbelievables and marvelous ones parade through Paris in bizarre, exaggerated fashions, with huge neckties, shaggy haircuts, and almost transparent high-waisted dresses, a deliberate, shocking rejection of the sober, simple clothing of the terror. They even affected a lisp, refusing to pronounce the letter R because it was the first letter of revolution. This week, decadent government lurches from one crisis to the next. You see royalist uprisings on one side and plots from die-hard Jacobin on the other. The directors, lacking popular support, have only one reliable tool to stay in power: the army. They repeatedly call on generals to use their troops to put down riots in Paris and to intimidate their political opponents. This is a fateful pattern. The government is becoming dependent on military force to survive. The nation, meanwhile, is exhausted. You can feel the deep societal longing for an end to the chaos. The French people have endured a decade of constant upheaval, of hope and terror, of famine and war. They are tired of the politicians, the corruption, the endless instability. They crave order, competence, and glory. They are tired of being governed by a weak committee. They are beginning to long for a savior. Historians still debate whether the Directory was a genuine, if flawed, attempt to create a stable, moderate republic, or simply a cynical oligarchy of the wealthy, designed to protect the gains of the revolution for a new elite. But in the power vacuum it has created, you can feel the entire nation looking towards the horizon, waiting for a man on a white horse. The stage is set. The Republic is a ship adrift, its 5 captains fighting over a tattered map, while the crew starves and the storm rages. You feel the collective exhaustion of a nation that has bled for a decade in the name of liberty, only to find itself governed by mediocrity and corruption.